Hey guys, hello everyone. My name's Charlie Cunningham. I'm the founder of Unearth Studios, and yeah, welcome to my presentation on the shoulders of titans, from modding to professional dev. And so for this talk, I'd like to present my journey from modding through to signing with a major international publisher, and then going on to collaborate with and do remote work from New Zealand with another studio. And the main goal is to cover these points here, like from getting started to getting recognized and then getting established, in order to inspire and encourage other sort of new devs or students that are looking to get into the industry. Yeah, and so there's a lot to get through, so let's jump into it. So the beginning of the journey, for a lot of people in the industry, starts with a combination of these sorts of things. I mean, there's sort of many different roads to it, but from a lot of people I've talked to and a lot of sort of content and stuff I've listened to as well, like so many devs that have come from a modding background, and everything starts with your interest and your inspiration, right? But you need a viable way to take that inspiration and then pour it into something that's interactive or game related. And then following from that, inevitably there's a lot of time investment with that, and then the inevitable challenges as well. I mean, starting with the journey, that's like my first rough mock-up of like my logo way back. So with your inspiration, I talk about this idea of the creative dream. So you'll have this dream in your mind that you want to take the things that you're interested in and then turn that into a career. What you're passionate about. How can I make that into a career? That's the sort of hard part, right? And so for myself, I've always been interested in stuff like this, like ancient history, mythology, stories of like the heroic adventurer, going into these places like tomb raiding, like anything to do with swords, all that kind of stuff. And that draws from many different places, right? The games and film and that sort of thing. You've got Conan the Barbarian. But this is back in 2009, and I had this creative dream in my head, right? So you might have the same thing. And I had no idea how to sort of act on this, because finding a job where it involves art in some capacity or media, it's quite a niche thing, especially in Hamilton, I feel. So naturally I'm going to save up and I'll go traveling. And of course, I went to places that I'm interested in, right? This goes back to what you're inspired by. And then following on from that is it obviously relates to the kind of content that you consume, right? So the types of games and the films that you're interested in, like you might be really into cars and mechanics, and so therefore you play a lot of like racing games or Gran Turismo or whatever, or you might be into high fantasy, and so that is a follow-on effect as well. Like for myself, like I love this kind of thing, so I found these games like Age of Mythology. But the thing is, like, you might find that you discover these games and they maybe hit like 3 out of the 5 things that really engage you, right? So imagine if there was a game that you found, that you discovered, that hits all of those marks, right? I don't know, maybe you're sitting there thinking, oh yeah, I've got that game in my head. I love this game. I'd love to, work on it. And so I ended up finding that game, which was Titan Quest. So I don't know, is anyone here that's played this game before? Yeah, action RPG. So this game, like I mean, you can see these points here, like straight away, it hits the ancient history kind of mark for me. Like it draws on that classical stuff, I mean, you start in ancient Greece and then you go through to ancient Egypt and then the Near East, which is like Asia and that sort of thing. And then like layered on top of that is mythology, right? Because it's grounded in this historical setting, but also it brings in the mythology and the kind of fantasy elements, which I also really love as well. And then addictive action RPG, like I never, this was my first introduction to the genre. Like I never played the Diablo series. And so when previous to that you saw, like I had RTS games up there, and when I discovered this genre, it's just the mad kind of loot collection. It also, it goes into that fantasy of being like you have your single character and then you can go into these amazing environments, into tombs and stuff. You're finding loot, like, so it really plays into that as well. So that really engaged me. And then it's got deep systems as well, and that kind of goes, that sort of overlaps with the next point about the strong player base. I mean, that's a testament to how deep this game is, because yeah, I mean, there's the amount of builds, and there's the itemization, the loot hunt, and all that combined. Yeah, it just keeps going, basically. And there's probably people in here that, you know, you might be a huge fan of Path of Exile, and you maybe scoff a little bit at this, but once you actually get into Titan Quest, like you'll realize how deep it goes. And then, of course, the critical point here is that it was released with the modding tools. And so, yeah, really ticked all the boxes. And this game was released back in 2006. And so I found it around 2008-ish, and then I went traveling and came back. And so you got this creative dream, and then you've discovered modding, right? And this can be really daunting at first, because, I mean, I had no experience in game dev, no experience in, like, I mean, I think the closest thing to this that I'd done is like making, you know, scenario maps for maybe Age of Empires, that sort of thing, right? And so this is kind of on another level. And so it can be daunting at the start, but the best advice I can give is just to make a start. So open the modding tools up, the map editor, and start, you know, check out the asset library, right? See what's in there. And this is where the investment and the inevitable challenge comes through. Because there's a lot to learn, right? And so what helps as well is to have some kind of direction. And so, for example, I knew, like, you know, action RPGs, they have this typical thing where the second act goes into the desert, right? And so for Titan Quest, you go to ancient Egypt, and because that's what I'm really interested in, I played that act non-stop. And so eventually I reached a point where I thought, okay, how can I want to expand this, you know, I want to sort of build my own level and, like, you know, really expand this area and see what I can do. And then I found the modding tools, and then I kind of wrote up this direction that I wanted to go, right? So I've got, you know, a handcrafted world, like a whole new campaign, emphasis on secrets, and I wanted to kind of introduce a little bit of a darker feel, just because I felt that was something that was missing from the base game, and I thought it could be improved upon. Huge cities, monsters, all of that sort of stuff. But the problem here is, like, I would kind of caution that, you know, this kind of goes into the challenges, because inevitably, like, you can't, like, you have all these ideas and ambition, but you can't, like, you have any idea how you're going to execute this, and it's just, yeah, it's too much, basically. So I don't know about you. I have this thing where I go through phases where I'm really into something. And at this particular time, I was really into the 1999 Mummy movie with Brendan Fraser, and so I thought, okay, I'm going to take this setting, and this is kind of going to be my, you know, what my mod's going to be about, right? Going to the City of the Dead. And yeah, and it also kind of speaks to my vision was, you know, because even though there's a bit of cheesiness in there, and Titan Quest also has a bit of that light-heartedness in there, in the Mummy, once you reach the City of the Dead, that's where kind of it starts introducing those horror elements and that dark atmosphere and that sort of thing. And then I really wanted to achieve that in my mod, right? But I would also a point here, caution you guys, like if you, if I was going through this again, I wouldn't base my mod on an existing IP, because down the track, it just, you know, there's many reasons like it becomes a big problem, because essentially you're going to have to purge all of that content you've made that's specific to an IP, right? Whereas if you had done it, you know, created something of your own that's not really connected to that, then, you know, that puts you in a better position. So this is my first level. And I mean, yeah, it's a bit of a mess, but that's okay. I mean, you're just starting out, right? So this is at this stage, it's about experimenting and learning the tools, getting familiar with things. So you can see there, I've got a bit going on. Like they've got some slapped-in stairs there in the cliff face. There's some stretched terrain textures. I have played around with a few combinations of textures there with the desert sand. There's a few little compositions, not too bad. But even like the fundamentals of the camera position in an action RPG, like you have the isometric perspective, right? And so that was off. I didn't know anything about the the scale of things in relation to the player. So I'm learning going through all of that as well. I started like building out the City of the Dead, and once again, it becomes a bit of a mess. There's sort of like a clutter of masonry scattered around, and I was just kind of putting stuff down and you know, having a go basically, but it's all part of the process, right? And then, yeah, that's another shot, just exploring the different, like transitions, I guess, from the desert into a more greener, vibrant area. And this is where modding, I really advocate for modding, because it's so effective at helping you discover what you really want to focus on in the industry. Because I mean, there's programming, scripting, there's narrative, game designers, and level design, of course, and you might not know exactly what one you want to focus on. And so through modding, this can really help you like hone in on that. And so for me, I discovered level design and my love for level design and environment art. And so I just like took off with that basically. And then through that, of course, you start learning the fundamentals of level design, you know, going through the process of, you know, how do you actually start with this blank canvas and start building a level out of that, right? You're starting with the blockouts. You start thinking about the flow and pacing, and developing your artistic eye. Like I've got there that screenshot, like the classic thing for new level designers is like the sign of repetition, and you don't want to see that, right? That's actually in the base game of Titan Quest way back from the original designers, and I was just going through and I noticed it, and I don't know whether the guy got sidetracked or something. Maybe sometimes you might use cliffs as just like your block out, so maybe he just dropped that in and then he meant to come back, who knows. But you learn about that as you go, and then you start adding in, you know, you get better at your composition, environmental storytelling, and of course you want to have a balance of all of these things. So this brings us to the challenges. These are sort of the common issues that you will encounter, and I fell into these big time, and this goes back to, you know, sort of my vision of what I wanted to do, right? The scope of the project that I had before me, and then that, you know, overlaps with feature creep, how much stuff, like you have all these creative ideas, right, in your head, and you want to put that into the game, right? But there's only so much you can do, right? And it all takes time. And it's sort of like, this is sort of a blessing and a curse as well, because with modding, you know, yes, you have to build out the world for people to explore, but you also have to add in, you know, do you want new monsters, items for players to find? You need to add some quests, you know, they have to have something to do there, right? You know, something meaningful. You start exploring particle effects, you know, adding some spice and flavor to your world. There's also these systems behind stuff, like how do you actually set up teleporters within the world? And so it sort of covers all that stuff, which is really, really great, because you're learning you're picking parts, that everything that goes into how a game is put together, right? And so you're kind of learning across the board in that way. And so speaking about scope, like, you have to excuse, this is my MS Paint map that I made back in back when I started. And so I would, first of all, I would recommend making a map, because it helps you with your direction, right, of your project. But I would caution not wanting to create the whole map, which is what I wanted to do. I was like, okay, I want to make the entire Nile, you know, like starting at the top with Memphis and then working your way down to the City of the Dead, right? Whereas I would recommend for you, if you're doing this, just start with like building, you know, the first portion, you know, the first necropolis or whatever it is, and then the first town, you know, and then go from there, and then really kind of complete that. And so you can see this just blew out even more. Like, I started here with the City of the Dead, right? And then I was like, okay, that's where the player is going to end up. So I need to go all the way back here to the start, and then like build out the beginning, and then, you know, eventually the player explores and then reaches the end. And yeah, it just the scope just kept growing and growing, and like all that stuff dotted around there is dungeons. And this is kind of a knock-on effect of also being a beginner level designer, and kind of being a perfectionist, because it becomes a trap. Because I discovered my love of level design, and so I kept focusing on that, which meant I was neglecting all the other aspects that I should be doing, right? Like, I should have created some levels and done maybe a first detail pass and then moved on. I also have this like obsession with dungeons, and I just created way too many. And so that was actually part of my job later on. I had to cut a lot of these. With the feature creep, so like I said, you guys will have all these ideas in your head, and once again, it's good to add these in, because it does come back to your vision and making your mod unique, right? And so, but you have to be careful not to add, like, see, I've got 3 up there. I wanted to have lore, like notes and stuff that you'd find throughout the world, and I wanted to have up the top is like thematic, you know, loot containers. And then I want to have like some deadly traps, like pressure plates, the classic dart wall traps, that sort of stuff. And so that's all good. But like, if you have like 10 or 15 of these things, like features that you want to add in, it all takes time. Like, even just doing something as simple as like swapping the meshes out, and then the textures and stuff, and the loot tables for the containers. I mean, that if you don't know how to do it, it's going to take a bit of time, right? This is another one. I wanted to add in a bit more of the sort of RPG elements to action RPGs. So really shallow RPG elements, basically like yes or no, you know, giving you some choice, quote unquote. But yeah, so you'd come across these areas where, you know, like it might be a broken bridge, for example, here, and then do you want to cross it? You click yes, inevitably you fall down the pit, and then it opens up another sprawling 3-level dungeon or something. Yeah, got a bit out of hand. With the solo work, that's another challenge. Generally, as modders, like, you know, you're working by yourself on it, and so because of that, you can't. I mean, you can test it yourself, but you don't. Where do you get your feedback from? How can you like talk to other people? You can't really do that. It depends on your circumstance, though, of course. And so this here is actually an example of the first and only play test I did. And of the mod with some friends, and I mean, yeah, there was major problems, especially with the pacing of the game. Like, you started in this tomb on the left, and then you had to explore through the tomb, and then like reach the exit to the exterior. And Titan Quest has these rebirth fountains, and I had played like from the point where you spawn to the first rebirth fountain was like this massive stretch, and level 1 characters, like, you have no gear. Like I scattered a few potions and stuff, but it turned into like this mad survival game just to get to the first rebirth fountain. Now you might be sitting there thinking, okay, Charlie, like, this is all very well. Like I have this creative dream, maybe I've discovered the game and I've gotten into the modding, I've got the project underway. But what about like, you know, everything else, your day-to-day life? What happens with that? Like that's a huge challenge. And it is like you're trying to balance this creative dream with your reality, aka your, you know, your daily life and your work commitments. But it can be done. So, for example, yeah, like I in 2012 I started a teaching degree, and then towards the end of that degree, that's when I actually discovered modding. And so, in parallel to starting modding, and then my, you know, everything else that's going on in my life, in my free time, that's when I'm learning modding, right? And because, you know, it's a game that you're really passionate about, that will drive you and keep you motivated. So instead of sitting down to like play a game or something, I would sit down and I'll be like, man, I'm going to create another level, or I really want to, you know, do this different things with it. And so I went right through a teaching degree, and then started my teaching career. And actually, when I was in uni, I remember in the lecture halls, teaching, like I'd be like drawing dungeon layouts in my books, and some of those actually made it into the game. And then, yeah, later on, I decided to go into the trades instead, and so I started an apprenticeship. And then this is all happening at the same time. I'm through the years learning about modding and level design. So going into the next portion, so we've done the sort of getting started. So you've had your inspiration, you've started modding, and then how do you make the next step, right, to getting recognized? And this is arguably the biggest, the hardest part, right, getting noticed, because it's due to, you know, just the magnitude of competition out there. And so I'm going to go through some practical steps that you can take to try and get recognized, right? And I've also put it in the specific order, because I recommend you go through all of these first 4 steps before you reach the last one, you know, contacting the IP owner. Because, of course, you're creating a mod, but you cannot sell it or monetize it because you don't own the IP, right? So the first thing is pushing the limits, right? So in Titan Quest, well, before I get to that, the idea of this is that you need to try and take the tools and innovate on them in some way, and try and push them and approach it in a different way that hasn't been done. If you can, you know, it doesn't. You might do that, sort of have like a 70% 30 ratio of how much, you know, you can kind of push it, but it's always, yeah, I recommend doing that. And so in the case for Titan Quest, throughout the game, they use this old grid-based dungeon system, which is like a tile-based set. And so I could have taken that and then just created bigger layouts, I guess, but it's not fresh, it's not new. And so what happened was, what happened was I saw, I had a look around, because you probably know another action RPG called Grim Dawn. Now, Grim Dawn takes the Titan Quest engine and has built heavily upon that, but the foundation is still the TQ engine, right? And so I saw the way that those guys had developed their dungeons, and they did away with the grid-based system. Instead, they used height map, or the terrain landscape, in order to create their dungeons. And the reason is because with the tile sets, you're restricted to a given tile set. And so, you know, if you want to, like, you can't paint any textures. You know, the walls, like this one in the top corner there, that's like an Egyptian temple-based tile set, right? So I'm restricted to that. And you're limited to the texture and the palette, and the theme. And also when it comes to complex layouts, they are really problematic, especially if you want to add elevation, multi-levels, even water into the dungeon. It's just, with the grid system, it becomes really, really tricky. And then you can't use height map. Like, say, for example, I want to take a chamber and then fill the whole room with sand. I mean, I can't really do that, and I have to I'm relying on the asset library. You know, what can I draw from there to like achieve what I want? And it's, you know, it's restrictive there. And then, like I said before, it's same as the previous design. So what I did, like I said, yeah, I took sort of a cue from the Grim Dawn devs and then started using the terrain-based system. All right. So instantly it opens up everything, like way more possibilities. Like I can paint in the textures for the sand. I can use the opacity layering to have like some of that old cobblestone coming through. And then I can draw on all the other assets. I mean, arguably you can drop all of these props and stuff into the grid-based dungeon set, but to try and unify it and make it work with that tile set is the challenge, right? Also, if you want to have like a level, like you can manipulate the height map, so you can, you know, if I want to have like the corners here, for example, you know, building up sand like over time, you know, stuff like that is really, you know, it's a lot more possible. And then of course you have to set up the lighting, right? Because at the moment it kind of just looks like an outdoor scene, you know. And so this is what it looks like in game, and it's probably a bit dark for you guys to see, but basically I had to, you know, figure out how do I remove the moon and the shadows and that sort of thing to make it feel like you're in an underground environment. And this here just shows the transition. So he's in the exterior, and then you go through the grid-based dungeon transition and then out into another you know, terrain map, but with the lighting setup it's all seamless, and so, you know, it feels like, okay, you're still within an underground environment. And I distinctly remember when that was my very first level that I achieved that with, and yeah, it was awesome. It was amazing. Like, so that's a part of about pushing the limits. This is another one example of the dungeons that I created for the game. And I mean, this kind of thing is just you wouldn't be possible with the grid system. Another point here is this is where you bring in a lot of your creativity, like and use, you know, like using the textures, for example. Like I painted in this sort of, I wanted to have this really cool Anubis chamber, and I thought, oh, I could paint this like ancient, you know, sort of mural on the ground. And so I had a go at it, and I think it's probably quite hard to see that's what it looks like in game, but you enter this chamber and then you realize, oh man, this is like this massive Anubis like painting, and that hadn't been seen before in the game as well. Moving on to the website. You might be thinking, oh, you know, websites, people always say make a website, but I do really recommend making a website, especially for modding. Like, I don't see a lot of modders out there, like they might be on the forums and stuff, but you know, they don't really have a website behind them. And I recommend this because it presents your, like, first of all, you can really present your work in a professional way. And right from the get-go, I really wanted to, like, I didn't have a studio or anything, but I knew, okay, I want to really present this in the most professional way I can. And you can't see it on here, even down the bottom of the page, I had like my little logo and my studio name, and it was like, it wasn't registered or anything, it was just like, just there, you know, to look the part. And also, you could do things like, I had a teaser trailer made up when I launched the website. So that's, you know, another engaging thing. And then following on from that is your community. I mean, community when it comes to modding is massive and really important. And it's really important that you get in amongst the community and share your work, especially on the forums, because like you make a development thread and you're getting feedback from the fans of the game, and you're getting more followers and people that, you know, are really on board with what you're doing and encouraging you. So that's why I've got the morale boost, because I mean, there's times you sit down and you don't feel like working on it, you know, and so that's sort of, it all kind of goes towards that that boost. Yeah, and then also you get things, you know, like for example, you jump on ModDB, like I got my mod features on the main page, so that was really cool. And then games media. This is a big one as well. Like, you need to start think bigger about and build your confidence. Mods are a huge part of the games industry, and just media in general. And so I encourage you to reach out to these guys, and you'll get more exposure. You never know what will happen. Like, I remember I just sent emails out to like IGN, PC Gamer, I think PC Power Play, the Australian publication, and then it was actually Kotaku who got back to me, and this caught their eye. And so the guy emailed and said, hey man, like, I'd love to write up an article about what you're working on. And so that, I mean, that was awesome. So, you know, you never know what can happen. I think it's well worth doing that. Now, at this point, this is when, like, so you've done all that pre-work of putting yourself and your work out there, right? Now is the time when you can start thinking about actually making that next step to contact the IP owner. But first, to address the modders code, you might be aware of, you know, this sort of unspoken rule in the community where, you know, you should be making the mod, like, you don't want to be a sellout, you know, you want to make the mod for the community, and you shouldn't really be looking to make money from it. And I mean, I can understand that point of view for sure. But there's nothing wrong. There's nothing wrong with wanting to turn your hard work into a career, right? I mean, it goes back to the original creative dream of turning your passion into a career. And so, yeah, I had that same thought in my head. You know, how can I take this content I've made and somehow make it into a job or career in the industry? And so I saw this new initiative called Modularity come up on ModDB, and it was like something to do with, you know, they would focus on publishing modders' work, but I didn't really go too deep into that because before I got there, I was talking to other friends and they said, hey, why don't you just like contact THQ Nordic, you know? If they say no, then, you know, go from there, you know, who knows? And so that's what I did. And I sent an email to THQ Nordic, and this is where I recommend be careful with your approach. You know, you want to send like a professional email, just talking about what you've got, sort of a small pitch about your content and sell your strengths. And then at the end of it, I believe I said something like, you know, I would love to explore business opportunities with you if possible, something like that. And so they actually got back to me, and the first thing they said was, well, thanks, Charlie, for getting in touch with us. We've actually had your mod on our radar. And so I think all of the previous points I just went through, I don't know which one it was, but I think that was part of them saying that, because maybe they saw that article about my mod on Kotaku, or maybe, who knows which one it was. But at some point they had noticed my work, right? So that was really cool. But you might be thinking, well, you know, it's a long shot. You know, what's the chances of that? And so that's why.
I'm a huge fan of modding, as most game developers probably are. And one point here is that when we got a job application at GGG, and they have, like, you look at modding experience before, like, academic credentials, basically. So get into modding, I guess, if you want to get into the games industry.
That's probably great advice.
Yeah, I would crypt there. Yeah, it's good advice. Like, so if they say no, then this is where like, you're still in a really good position to break into the industry, because you've got all that experience behind you. And so this is where sort of my path diverges from maybe the typical path of modders, because like Eric was just saying there, a lot of studios and in the industry, they do really look first at your modding experience, or what practical experience do you have building, you know, whether it's level design or creating monsters or whatever it is, right? And so therefore, you know, you go on that path of applying to a studio, and then you join them based on your experience from modding, right? And that kind of sets you up. Whereas for me, I had the publisher come to me and well, I contacted them, and then they came back and said, yes, we're interested, and we want to take your content and turn that into a new expansion for Titan Quest, which is, I would argue, the ultimate dream. I still can't quite believe it. And but that's what happened, and you never know what's going to happen. And so that takes us to the next part, which is getting established, the final part. So you have your studio. What happens with your mod content? Or sorry, you don't have your studio, but like, let's look at whether you need it or not. What happens with your mod content, and then obviously you're going to start collaborating and doing remote work. And I've just got that timeline there just as a reminder, because remember, throughout all this process, I'm still like working in the trades, doing my apprenticeship, and you know, from the point it was 2018 when that was the point. From 2014 to 2018, I learnt modding and created my project, and then that's when I contacted THQ Nordic. So forming a studio, this, if you're like me, it was just a totally unknown process, and so you have to look into what this involves. And so at my day job, I started listening to like podcasts on, you know, forming studios, and like just consuming any kind of content I could about what that involves and the pros and cons of doing that, right? And so I decided, like, it might be different for you, but for me, I decided that it was best for me to form a studio because of the nature of my mod and what was sort of on the table. Because THQ wanted to essentially buy my content, right, and then turn that into a game. And so I felt that, you know, I wanted to be acknowledged for all that hard work, and a good way to do that is to have a studio and build your foundation and your name and your brand. And so that's what I did. But you have to think about what's important to you. And so this goes into the sort of helping with the negotiations, right? Like when we were in the negotiation process, that's another thing, like on a podcast about negotiations the whole time. Like, but yeah, when you're in the negotiations, think about what's important to you. So for me, it meant a lot that I had my name, my studio name, up there in the splash screens when you open the game. And yeah, I mean, like, so there's me up there in studios with like all these other like 40, 50 people companies, and there's just solo me from Hamilton, New Zealand. But that's what, you know, and it all, obviously it depends what the publisher comes back to. They might say, no, we're not going to do that, but THQ Nordic were great, and especially the boss that I was working with, and he really recognized what I had put into this, and he knew what that meant to me. And you can also, I had this splash screen animation made up for the beginning of the game as well. So that was part of the agreements. Now, in between this period, because from the point where you contact them, and if they say yes, there's going to be a long process. Typically, I mean, it might, you know, it's case by case, but so it was 2018 till 2020 before I actually signed on with THQ Nordic. And so in the meantime, though, you have to think about these sorts of things. So how is your mod going to be used in the game, right? And how, so I was actually, you might be asked to do the same thing. And so I was asked to write up a design document and propose basically ways, how am I going to integrate my content into the universe of Titan Quest, right, and the existing world. And so that's something that I had to do. And then you have to be prepared to hand over your ownership of the stuff you've made as well. And also, it can be a bit painful because of the expectations. Like, for example, you know, I had built mine based on kind of the Mummy, right? And so I had to go and then basically purge a whole bunch of stuff, which, you know, I really liked. But, you know, the reality is you can't have that in there. So this brings me to collaboration. So you've finally signed on with the publisher. And my main role was as a level designer. And this can be pretty scary, because if you've never been in the industry before, like I was, it was all fresh. I didn't know the process of, you know, of development from pre-production to, you know, launching a game. And so you right at the beginning, there's going to be a lot of sort of meetings and setting up stuff on your end, especially being, you know, sort of remote working. And you're going to be meeting the team. I met the other level designers, and this was actually really cool because Demanoida, he was the other main level designer, Dmitry, and he's this Russian guy. And he actually, his journey was pretty similar to mine. Like, he had actually been modding Skyrim, and then he had approached THQ, kind of similar to me. And so that's a completely different, separate game, like not even owned by the publisher, but his modding experience. And I think just him reaching out, you know, and at the time they needed level designers. And so he, from a modding background for Skyrim, he joined the team to work on a Titan Quest expansion with me. And I didn't actually like him at the start because he was super, like, he had this brutal, critical way of approaching the stuff I had created. He's just like, you know, Charlie, your dungeons are too dark, or like, why have you got this temple there? You know, like, but eventually as time gone on, we became really good friends. And yeah, it was just a really cool experience to have that kind of another guy there who was from the same background. And so the studio I was working with was Digital Arrow, and they're based over in Serbia. And so with that comes major challenges with like time zone differences, right? And so all of this stuff overlaps between your collaboration and then the remote work. So yeah, you're setting up everything, and then you're starting to learn the process, and then you're going through the pre-production, the planning stages. And in parallel to this is your remote work, and kind of your daily routine kicks in. And so this is a massive adjustment, but you have to remember that you've signed on and you've agreed to do this, and so you're committed. And yeah, so for myself, and like, I mean, ideally you don't want to have a second job. You want to you want this to be your job, right? But the reality is that you likely will have a second job that you still you're not prepared to leave financially. And so you're going to have to manage that. And so for myself, I would start at like 7:30 in my day job, and then work through till 5, and then I'd come home and then have like a couple of hours at home with my family, and then I'd start my dev job from 6 p.m. till like usually 1 a.m. or 1:30, and then I'd get up and do it all over again the next day. And it sounds crazy, but I mean, I would argue that this is your chance, and it's a huge opportunity, and the massive motivating factor is you're working on something that you're so passionate about, and so that will just drive you. And so we were collaborating on a full new expansion, Titan Quest Eternal Embers. My content was part of the Egypt Act, and yeah, it was like, yeah, full expansion, new campaign, new features, new mastery. And so my first task was working on the flooded caves. And so this is where you really draw on your modding experience, right? Remember, you have used this engine for like years, and especially if you've like done level design, like you've worked out kind of a workflow for yourself. And so I just started going with that. And so what I would do is I would establish like a sort of scene, you know, of what I want to go for with this particular level. And so I would determine, you know, the textures and the color palette, the combination of assets that I want to use there, and I would build that. And once I was happy with that, then I would continue with blocking out the level and starting to add more and more stuff in. And so, yeah, this is just like kind of an overview shot of the size. So it's kind of the first major dungeon that you encounter in the expansion, and of course it's using this new system that I had done as well, like with the non-grid based dungeons there as well. And this is what it looks like in game. Yeah, sorry, it's probably difficult to see in this lighting, but with everything set up, yeah, I was really happy with the results of that, and so were like the other team. And it was really cool just getting their feedback as well as I went through. Now, with level design, you know, inevitably you get to levels or you're given a task where you struggle with it. Like, it's not your jam, it's not your kind of environment. And so the Ruins of the Silk Road was the one for me. And because it was this really open, flat space, and then it was like this kind of wooded pine location. And so I was just, I wasn't really inspired by it. And so when that happens with you, I recommend, like, you still have your references that you'll be given from the art team. And so I knew, okay, the major features are there. There's going to be this lake in the middle. I know there's a trading post. So that's what I started with. And then, you have to go through the process of drawing from different sources, getting more references to try and kickstart that inspiration. This here, probably not the best practice, but at the time, because I was struggling, I just kind of focused more on building out these map chunks first before blocking out the rest of the level. And it can even be just a single idea, like if you're searching online. So I had this idea up in the top left. You know, I want to. It'd be cool to have this kind of ancient Chinese shrine on top of this cliff formation with a bridge. Let's just start with that, and then I built out from there. Another one. Classic Diablo 2, like I had this lake, so I wanted to create this lake tomb basically, and sort of like use that as inspiration as well. And so this is how sort of the level turned out, and I was really happy with it. But it was a bit of a long road to get there. We also did design maps. This is another really good practice where once you've done the level, you take kind of these overview screenshots and then you note down all the points of interest, and then that can really tell you how dense your area is for exploration, and just that moment-to-moment play time, you know, where, you know, and you can sort of identify if something's lacking or not. I also worked on the ascent. So this is sort of going into the ancient Chinese mountainous area, and so a point about this is you might want to create or you might be tasked to do this, or create these really striking vistas and stuff with these deep valleys. But you have to remember, especially as a level designer, this is essentially going to double your work, because you have to, like, wherever the player sees, you have to dress that, right? And so this is what it turned out like, a really striking level, and like, I'm really proud of how this turned out, but there's so much more work gone into this, because all of those edges, all of those valleys, you have to dress and make it look, you know, to a certain standard. I mean, you know, arguably you could like hide some of it with the height fog, but you want to do it right. Now, building the world, remember you've signed on as a level designer and to integrate your content, but it's probably very likely that you're going to be asked to work across the entire expansion as a level designer, right? And so that's exactly the case for me. Like, in addition to my content, I had to work, like I started actually with ancient China and designed all of these levels here before I even got to my attention, you know, turned to the Egypt portion. Okay, thanks. So with Egypt, I had to rework the entire act because there's certain expectations, and the content you have, it needs to meet a shippable professional standard. And so I was tasked to go through the entire area and bring it up to that standard. But it's also like, it was a real big challenge, but also it was really a credit to the other team and the publisher as well, because they gave me the creative freedom to do that. And they knew that it was kind of, you know, my baby. And so they respected that. And of course, there's stuff that needed to be changed, and like there's sort of different visions and stuff, but you have to work through that. But by and large, yeah, it stayed, a lot of it was still my vision. And so this is another example of one of the first dungeons you go into, still using that same system, but I had to do things like here, the red line there follows the original player path through the area. And so I had to think about, you know, different players. Like some people just want to run straight through, right? They don't want to worry about exploring the whole thing. And so I want to cater to both both types of players. Also, throughout this process, I've started learning the sort of pipeline as well, and how, when to ask for resources and different art assets and stuff. One of the challenges here was my vision as well, sort of clashing with Titan Quest, like the kind of universe there. So I wanted to have these secrets, but I didn't introduce them in the best way. There's a lot. Basically, I wanted to have these secrets, but the publisher came and said, we need to introduce these. I want you to put markers on these secrets so people know where they are. And I disagreed with that, and I just suggested a compromise. Hey, how about we add a proximity to the marker so that as they get close to the secret, then it will show up on the map. And so that's what we went with. But the issue is it hadn't been breadcrumbed and introduced to the players at the beginning. And so they didn't even know to look for this. This here, just to showcase. So you still need to remember, you don't just do away with your vision as well. I mean, there's a reason that the publisher was interested in your work, right? And so you can kind of pull back some of that, but still try and keep in the elements. So I wanted to have these kind of, that same atmosphere in the darker, bigger dungeons to explore. This is actually using a lot of sort of the Babylonian assets from the game. And so that's where your creativity comes in, like trying to work in and different compositions in a way that it's still unified and still makes sense within, an Egypt environment. This here, there's other challenges that you might face, in terms of the narrative and the structure. Like, for example, I had built my necropolis based around Saqqara, which geographically is it's close to these other areas which exist in the base game, and it just wouldn't make sense. So basically, I had to rework that entire area, but also into a different, necropolis. So it actually was based on Abydos, and that was a real location called the Osirian, and so that's what I modeled it after. And I recommend, using real world references where possible. And this here, I just want to speak quickly to the dilemma of the desert environment. I mean, a lot of people say that, you can't, it's just always a boring, open, expanse of sand, basically. But Egypt and desert environments, there's a lot of diversity that you can bring to them. And this is like a typical sand-swept environment, whereas this one here is like, a more canyon, barren type of region. So the challenges, so I'm going through this quickly because we're sort of almost out of time. But the final challenges is really you're juggling the responsibilities versus obligations and expectations. Because you're new, you have your core responsibilities, like if you're a level designer, those tasks, but also because you've worked with this engine for so long, you may know it more than some of the other devs that you're working with. And so programmers or people will come to you and say, hey, can you do this? And you might feel obligated to say yes, which I did, and you eventually you take on too much. So you need to balance those out. And so I recommend coffee and just getting back into it. Just quickly, post-launch, you have this typical period after the game launches, and so for us it was about 6 months. And this is really cool, especially financially, it draws out your development even more. You obviously are fixing bugs and that sort of thing, but you can also add in content that didn't make it into that initial release, and that's exactly what we did. We created hardcore dungeons. We added in new mechanics as well. So one of the dungeons I created was this Egypt one, and this, at the end of the project, it brought together all of my experience, and one of the ones I'm most proud of, because it adds in these classic traps, and just a showcase of that. So I was also playing with the camera here. So typically running to the south of the screen in action RPG is always the worst way, because you can't see what you're going to encounter, right? And so I specifically designed this corridor so it's running that way. So it's difficult to see where you're going. There's these traps with different elements. There's poison and the classic dart ones, so there's damage over time you're going to deal with. In addition to ambush enemies, ranged and melee guys. When you get to this kind of junction here, this intersection, and if I had kept going the same direction, it goes to a dead end. This way here, once again, adding in even more types of traps. Like now you've got fireballs and electricity. You know, I've actually got God mode on. That's why I'm not dying. But yeah, you can see like. So I'm trying to sort of think about all the different builds that players are going to throw at this hardcore dungeon, and how can I really challenge them with it. Lastly, think about something what's something meaningful that you can bring to the game. Like, you know this game best, you've worked with it, you're passionate about it. For myself, I wanted to introduce this iconic temple into the game, which is part of the original cinematic. And because I knew it learnt the pipeline, I had enough time to actually draw up a concept to give to the art team ahead, and then so that they could really, so I could put this cool set dress there in the middle of the temple. So just in conclusion, guys, think about, the creative dream. Try and maintain and keep this alive, no matter what you're doing. Be prepared to invest time in it. Don't be afraid of learning new things. Modding is the best way, or one of the best ways to start your journey, and it teaches you across the board, and it helps you discover your real passion for the industry. Level design is an amazing job. You get to build the world that people explore. Start with the fundamental principles and keep at it, refining, and make small scenes and then build up from there. And also think about the functionality of the level as well as the aesthetics. Exposure, trying to get recognized. I highly encourage you to just go through those steps I outlined. And as creatives, you always have like this, you want to hold things close to your chest, and being a perfectionist and that sort of thing. I was the same, but yeah, I really encourage you to really get out there, and don't be afraid to reach out to the big boys as well, because there's opportunities waiting. Collaboration and remote work is 100% viable in New Zealand. It's not easy though, with the time differences and stuff and your particular circumstances, but yeah, it's very rewarding if you can make it work, and be prepared to go through those stages as a new dev as well. And then what's next? So in between the last release and the new one, and the new project, I had to learn a new engine. So I felt like starting from scratch again, which was really daunting. But a lot of those same principles, especially with level design, followed through into Unreal. And then I also joined Grimlaw Games, who are based over in Munich, Germany, and working on Project Minerva. And I've become a lead level designer as well on the team. And I actually created this slide before August the 11th, when the game was announced. So this is, do I have time for the trailer? No, okay. I'll skip the trailer then, but oh, how do I go to? Sorry, 1 second. Yeah, that's what the Project Minerva is. Titan Quest 2, a full-on sequel to the original game 17 years later. And yeah, I can't wait for you guys to see what we're building. Many of those levels in the official screenshots are the ones that I've created as well. And so, like I said, it's been a massive journey, and this is what I'm working on next. And yeah, if you haven't already, I encourage you to go and wishlist it. And yeah, thanks very much, guys.